What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line from the bridge of the Weatherlight, you're Squee, right, Luis?
I think that's what we determined.
Squee Goblin to Bob. Welcome. And I'm Karn, by the way.
Yeah, no, definitely Karn. We, as you may doubt, have figured out already, are going to go over Weatherlight today. And as a result, we've got a special guest.
We do. We have Airtie here with us, otherwise known as TBS, the Ben Sec. Ben, you moved since last time we had you on, but you're settled in and you're ready to get back to work here doing the important things on the podcast with us, talking about old sets of Magic. Welcome back on the show.
Thanks very much. I mean, it's been a while since we've been able to do one of these type of episodes. So I'm really excited. Actually, Weatherlight came out just after Weatherlight came out. It was Australian Nationals in 1997, and it's actually that tournament is where my nickname actually originated. So there's actually this is how long that nickname has.
Are we going to get to hear the origin story today on the show?
I think I've said that to someone, but if we want, we can maybe sign off with it. I don't mind.
Okay, yeah, I want to hear that one too. I've always known you as TBS. You were introduced to me as TBS, so yeah, I want to hear that one. Well, we're going to be talking about Weatherlight, and this is a set that came out in 1997, and we're going to go over all the fun little details and look back at it. Hopefully with fond eyes, but sometimes with a critical eye, and take you down a little walk down memory lane. Before we get into that, we got to mention the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources for us. If you want to support what we do on the show, that's the place to do it. You get a thank you card and a LR sticker in the mail. If you sign up, that's at any level. You can sign up for any amount, any time frame. You can quit, you can come back. There's no obligation. It's really well set up to be able to kind of work with your life however you see fit. And if you like what we do here on LR, that's the place to support us. And again, it's patreon.com/limited resources. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our main topic here, because I want to make sure that we can get to all the things that we have to talk about. I'm going to give you the very broad strokes on Weatherlight before we get into the details. First off, this is a set that came out in 1997. It's the 11th expansion for Magic, and it is the third of a block. And what that is a 3-set block that they used to do back in the day. And up until not that long ago, a few years ago, they stopped doing it. But this was the third one. And TBS, so this was what were the 2 sets prior? Mirage and Visions?
Yeah, Mirage and Visions. And then they basically decided to start a new storyline in the middle of the kind of the block. And this is why it feels a little bit, it's not as thematically connected to Mirage and Visions, because they decided to start this storyline. They wanted to start it as soon as possible. So this was actually the first time they did that. Okay.
This started the Weatherlight saga, which was kind of a lore storyline that continued from 1997 until 2001. We'll be talking about that and the impact that that's had. This set has 167 cards, which you'll note is a lot fewer than the sets that they come out with now. 50 rare, 55 uncommon, 62 commons in this set, because it was considered an expansion set, a smaller set of the bigger block. The way it used to be was the first set was the big set, and then the next 2 were the smaller sets, and this is a smaller one. Kind of funny. We can dive into these individually a little later if we want, but just from the big pictures perspective, there was no new mechanics introduced with the set. Again, you have a lot less design space.
You got to read the blurb. But
the mechanics that they did put in are banding, cumulative upkeep, phasing, flanking, and swamp walk.
These are some of the least mechanics.
Fun mechanics.
I mean, granted, there's not a lot of mechanics. There's not a lot of banding in this set, but the fact that banding is actually one of the very few mechanics they put in is kind of crazy. I mean, this set is a little bit of a mishmash. It doesn't have a lot of cohesion. There are little kind of mini cycles in there, but I wouldn't say that this is
This is a very
design.
strange list. Banding is considered one of the most confusing yet also powerful mechanics ever. Cumulative upkeep is considered one of the disaster mechanics. It was, in fact, fundamentally, they don't design cards that have mechanics like this. Not just cumulative upkeep specifically, but things that charge you over time and eat up your resources slowly. People just hate playing them. Phasing's fine. Flanking's actually kind of cool. And then just a random Swamp Walk in there. Just like, I don't know, there must be one card that really wanted it. So they put that in. The other two things I'll mention, there are two broader themes that didn't have specific mechanics tied to them, and they're kind of weird too. One of them is graveyard order matters. So the order of the cards in your graveyard could matter, which is, again, something that they don't do anymore. And then sacrifice
even
buyouts.
a rule, like because of old cards like Nether Shadow and old sets like Weatherlight in the older formats where those cards are legal, which is just Legacy and Vintage, graveyard order matters. In every set now, like for good reason, it doesn't, where you're playing a game of Standard or Limited, you can pick up your graveyard and rearrange it because that makes so much more sense. It's a huge quality of life issue. So
it is.
We're not starting at a high note when every single thing you've read about Weatherlight so far sounds horrible.
But what about sacrifice buyouts where you have to pay something or lose your permanent? Are we having fun yet?
Buyouts isn't even text that we would understand as text.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they really did try and kind of mitigate some of the negative stuff about some of these mechanics. Like I wouldn't say that they were these are just they appear and they suck. They actually tried to make cumulative upkeep kind of interesting. There were actually some new cumulative upkeeps that were one of them is actually cumulative upkeep, draw a card. So that's actually just strictly positive. And then some of the other cumulative upkeeps kind of count how many turns that you've basically paid for it. So the more turns you had paid for it, the bigger the effect at the end. So they weren't trying new things with these mechanics, but ultimately these are pretty negative mechanics overall. And so you'll see it in some of these cards that there's just a lot of kind of badly looking cards, I guess. They just don't really appear very well on the card itself.
Okay. Yeah. So it's an interesting start, right, to our Weatherlight journey here. There's some kind of interesting stuff with the storyline, and the stuff they did with that. But then there's a lot of wow, what were they thinking here? And it's a small set, not a lot of wiggle room, that kind of stuff. Okay. But what I want to do, TBS, is before we get into talking about all this stuff in depth, let's do a crack-a-pack. Let's fire off a crack-a-pack. You said you have something we can do for that, and we can pretend as if we were sitting down in 1997 to draft, which was a thing by this time, right? Mirage kind of ushered that in.
Yeah, Mirage ushered it in. Weatherlight by at that point, draft was fairly well established. This is the first time that you'd actually draft 3 sets, so this is actually interesting in that way. It's very, very weird because Mirage and Visions are quite tightly connected when it comes to mechanics, but Weatherlight wasn't mechanically connected very well. Also, it was kind of a bit of a power outlier. There was a really big power color imbalance in Weatherlight, which is kind of the first time that it was that bad. White was very much better than the rest of the colors, but regardless, it was draft was there, and when you saw these cards, you really had to figure out how they fit with the Mirage and Visions cards.
Okay. So are we going to give ourselves credit for listening to Limited Resources episode minus 500 or whatever, and we know that white's the best color here, or are we going to take it straight?
Remember also back then, because sets were drafted in chronological order, so you actually opened Weatherlight last, so you never would have seen these cards first. You would have seen what cards you already had, so you kind of had to plan for Weatherlight, which is opposite to what they did in more recent times when we had blocks, where you start with the last set first and go backwards.
Well, maybe what we could do is pretend that we've sat down. Let's say we're at a MagicCon event or a friend's house, and somebody, because there's always that person, right? Somebody always has to say, does anybody want a chaos draft? Okay, I get. And we ended up with the Weatherlight pack, all right? So that's where we're at.
Okay, here we go. So the first card available is Barrow Ghoul. This is black and 1. It's for a 4/4, so pretty good so far. Summon zombie. During your upkeep, remove the top creature card of your graveyard from the game or bury Barrow Ghoul. So basically, exile the top creature card of your graveyard or destroy it.
But I get a 2 mana 4/4?
Yeah.
But I can't play it on turn 2 like ever, right?
Basically.
Yeah, fetch lands didn't exist back then. Well, no, that's not true. You could play the
but it has to be
River.
A creature, right?
It's creature.
Oh, yeah, creature only. So, yeah, no, I mean, I remember looking at this card and looking at a lot of these cards, and Weatherlight was really high on the undercosted thing with drawback, like whether that be cumulative upkeep, whether that be exile a creature, whether that be sack a forest. There's a lot of different things, and it's a truism that people tend to underrate cards with drawbacks. Like Juzam Jin was famously thought to be bad for a long time when back then it was very good. Mm-hmm. But Weatherlight had a lot of cards that looked to me good, but I know are not very good.
Yeah, this has to be one of those.
This was not good in limited. Like I know I don't want to taint it too much, but this card was not very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so second card is Tendrils of Despair. 1 black sorcery. It says sacrifice a creature, : Now, this is a weird wording because this is before they said as an additional cost to play, sacrifice a creature. They tried out this kind of wording. So it's as additional cost to play this card, sacrifice a creature.
Okay.
Target opponent chooses and discards 2 cards. So it's basically a mind rot for 1 black, but you also have to sacrifice a creature.
Man, Luis really perked up when you said tendrils of, and then he kind of flopped back down when you said despair.
Not a good card now.
He was going to storm off, and now we're just passing this thing along.
Okay, next one. Rogue Elephant. 1 green, 3/3. So pretty good. 1 green, 3/3. When Rogue Elephant comes into play, sacrifice a forest or bury a Rogue Elephant. So
you can pay 1 mana 3/3, but you got to sack a forest when it ETBs. Ouch. Was removal good in this set? Like, could I actually get away with this?
Removal wasn't great in this set, but it's not something you could play turn 1. A lot of times people kind of use it as a curve topper where you could be able to double spell at the end.
Is he serious, Luis? I'm going to put Rogue Elephant in my deck and not play a turn 1?
Yeah, the idea would be you'd go 2-drop, 3-drop, then 3-drop plus Rogue Elephant to really put the pressure on them.
I don't think I could do that. I think if I had it in my opener, I'm like, this thing's getting in for 9 before,
People did it all the time.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be alone. I would say that those people generally
didn't win a whole lot.
It wasn't great for them.
That's tough.
Okay, so anyway, we'll continue on. Cinder Wall, red, 3/3, so also good stats, just like Rogue Elephant. If Cinder Wall blocks, destroy it at end of combat. But remember, it's a summon wall or creature wall, which had the hidden text of it can't attack.
So that was before Defender was a specific thing. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so the next one is Octavia Freet. Green, 2 for a 5/4, cumulative upkeep, green.
I like this one too.
How do we gauge cumulative upkeep?
So I think a good way to gauge cumulative upkeep is like for Uktabi, for example, how many turns have to elapse before you're no longer going to play this card?
Right. So that's how you approach it, right?
Yeah. At what point are you unable to pay the upkeep?
You got to figure if it's if I get 3 turns with I guess if I'm not counting the first turn, if I get 3 attacks or 3 options for blocks or whatever, so 2.5, we'll call it. Okay. It's going to have done something by then, right? It's going to force a trade or.
This is a little bit like a Blastoderm. It's obviously weaker, but you spend a couple mana on this. It'll probably go away after a couple turns, but your opponent can't take 15 damage, right? At some point they're going to have to do something.
And this is a time when creature sizes were much, much smaller. This was considered a very, very good creature size for 4 mana.
Okay.
Nowadays, you can get like probably 5/4s for blank text, basically.
So is Uktabi Afreed actually pretty good?
I think green was not very good in this set, me personally, but that's just kind of. But I think the card's probably fine-ish. We have another green card as the next card. Green and 4 for Redwood Treefolk. That's just a 3/6 vanilla.
Hey, I got to tell you, if we're sitting down for a chaos draft, I'm kind of into stats for mana. Just like give me some beef, give me a green black deck with some removal, and I'm okay. This is the one with the Phil Folio artwork, right? The kind of weird, yeah.
Yes. I mean, if your name is Shuhei Nakamura, this is like an instant windmill slam.
Yeah,
he does love his trade.
I mean, he would slip down to a 3/5, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is better than that.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Lava Storm. Red 3. Instant. Lava Storm deals 2 damage to each attacking creature or 2 damage to each blocking creature. So 5 mana. Or kind of like a targeted pyroclasm.
What do you think, Luis?
I mean, it's pretty decent, especially since back then no one played around anything. So you could just wipe their board with this a lot of the time.
Okay.
Okay, we'll get to the next one. So, Goblin Vandal, red for a 1/1. Summon Goblin. Red : destroy target artifact defending player controls. Goblin Vandal deals no combat damage this turn. Uses ability only if Goblin Vandal is attacking and unblocked, and only once its turn.
So if you can get the Vandal unblocked, it still does this. It doesn't do its damage anymore, but you can pay red to blow up an artifact.
Yeah, that's right.
But how the heck are you getting a 1/1 through?
You're red. You can bolt some stuff.
Okay. Didn't see a lot of bolts, but
it was good card in Constructed because you could play this turn 1 and they couldn't play their artifacts early, but it was not a very good card in Limited now.
Yes, yeah. This actually did seem some fringe Constructed play. Okay. Fatal Blow, 1 black, instant, bury target creature that was damaged this turn. This effect actually, it still turns up every once in a while in modern Limited.
Yeah, they've even stapled draw a card onto it, and it's still not particularly good.
Yeah. I mean, back then, I did.
Sure, back then it was fine because you could take out their 5/5 that was the best card in their deck, and you had no other way in your whole deck to deal with it.
and there were pingers. You don't see pingers that much anymore. There were some common pingers around. Okay, next one is Blossoming Wreath, 1 green, instant. Gain life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard.
Man, these are the ones, right? These are the ones that people just would pack into their deck as many as they could fit, and gain their 3 or 4 or whatever it was.
Okay.
That is very much a card of its time, right there.
Yes,
conditional life gain.
Okay, next one is Phantom Wings, blue and 1, enchant creature. This is basically an aura. Enchanted creature gains flying, sacrifice Phantom Wings, return enchanted creature to its owner's hand. So it's kind of like you put it in your guy, like, it has flying and you can attack and protect itself if it gets hit. One thing you can do actually is you can put it on an opponent's creature and actually bounce it. So it's like has a bit of flexibility. So
seems pretty bad.
It's not great, but actually was played a little bit back then.
Okay, all right.
Next one is Phantom Warrior, blue 1 for 2/2 and unblockable.
In
the Phantom Ninja, which was the same text, was in Modern Horizons, which granted had a ninja theme, but even without that, like the fact is, when the Limited games went to turn 20, this card was obviously quite strong.
Yeah, this is a pretty decent card back then.
I would play this one.
Mist Moon Griffin, white and 3, flying, 2/2. Sorry. If Mist Moon Griffin is put into graveyard for in play, remove it from the game, then put the top creature card from your graveyard into play.
That's actually okay, right?
It was actually really good because it was kind of card advantage.
Yeah.
Also,
you have to set it up a little bit, but I mean, if you get anything back, it's probably fine.
2/2 flyers for 4 are actually kind of like pretty standard. I mean, I know we talk about wind drakes nowadays. This was actually like 2/2 fly for 4 was very, very common.
Okay. So we've got a couple of decent shots here, right? The 2/2 unblockable and this Griffin.
Yeah, the last two were uncommon, and this is the third uncommon.
Okay.
Downdraft 2, so a green and 2. Green. Sorry, it's an enchantment. Green, target creature loses flying until end of turn. So just take it out of the air, and you can sacrifice the enchantment itself. Downdraft deals 2 damage to each creature with flying.
Yikes! Pretty bad.
Sideboard-ish kind of card.
Sideboard thing, yeah. Okay.
And the final card is Abeyance.
There we go.
Oh, a headline.
One white and 1 instant until end of turn. Target player cannot play instants, interrupts, sorceries, or abilities requiring activation cost. Draw a card. So this one actually has a little bit of history to it. At the time when it was released, activation costs included mana abilities. And so
from lands.
Yeah, so basically you could just cast a spell in your opponent's upkeep and they essentially just get time walked.
And you drew a card.
You drew a card, so like it replaces itself just like time walk
It's
does.
instant speed time walk that's a cantrip?
They could still play a land, so they didn't miss a land drop like time walk kind of does.
Okay.
I mean, look, if you were playing back then, you open this card, you'd rare draft it. It was worth a lot of money. It was like, I think $15 at the time.
Which was a lot for cards back then.
Oh, yeah. $15 was like, it's equivalent to what, like a $40 card now, like equivalent when it comes to value, because the card was not that expensive. Anyway, so that's the rare. So I wouldn't say this pack really covered Weatherlight in glory here.
No, it didn't. But so we just take Abeyance, like even in 1997 monetary considerations aside?
Oh, so Abeyance doesn't work like that anymore, right?
Right.
It no longer does. It doesn't stop mana abilities. But at the time when it did, I mean, how good and limited would be 1 and a white, your opponent can't tap lands this turn, draw a card. Really good. Like, imagine you're just on the draw with that card, and on the start of their turn 3, you Abeyance them. They skip their turn 3 effectively. You draw your card. Now you're kind of on the play. Like,
that's incredible.
Yeah. So
I don't remember it being that good in limited, but I think it might have just been of the time. Like people weren't kind of playing that card.
Well, it's also probably that when a draft, like in modern limited, if you had a card that said they couldn't cast spells this turn, draw a card, it would be very, very good. It would let you steal initiative, let you skip their turn kind of. Back then when the average game length was like 15 instead of 7 or 8, that matters a little less. You're not getting tempoed out,
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was not considering monetary value, I think I would probably take the Mist Moon Griffin, because I think that card is like generically good, but I don't know. It's not a particularly great pack.
Yeah, I mean, back then, 4 mana 2/2 flyer was just a playable card.
Yeah.
And this one would at least some percent of the time get you just a straight up creature back when it died, and maybe even something good. Like if, I don't know, were there discard outlets? Could you reanimate?
There was a little
about
bit
that, but more about like you just would use it for value randomly.
Just get a random creature back. Yeah, the funny part on Abeyance too, TBS, is you said it has a little bit of history tied to it with what you described, but also it has a word that we don't see anymore. It has interrupt.
Oh, yes.
We were all like, yeah, I remember that. But that was a separate card type that was, deigned to be able to go slightly faster than instant speed.
Yeah, basically all counter spells were interrupts. There's a couple other cards that were interrupts. Basically any spell that interacted with other spells on the stack was an interrupt, more or less.
Yeah, and the ones that weren't couldn't. So it was its own thing. Then they simplified the rules at some point and made it so that all of those things were just considered instant or instant speed, and they're all the same. Which thank God they did that, because there's a lot of things that they changed, as you can see, and you'll hear these stories too all the time about stuff like what TBS described, where people are like, abeyance, okay, you can't use your lands, which apparently was the case at that time, which is kind of insane. I really wonder if that's what, like, when they printed this card, is that what they thought it was going to do? Or is this just the sort of classic loose, they didn't really have a hold on everything yet?
Yeah, I think it's basically they didn't, just back then, I don't think they thought too deeply about what the card was going to do when printed, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think their intention for this card was essentially what the modern card Silence is doing. Mm-hmm. It's essentially just like, I get to force through something.
Right.
Or, you essentially can't play a spell this turn. Like, that's what it's trying to do, Silence. As it turns out, because it's a cantrip, it's kind of like it would be ubiquitous in Constructed until they nerfed it. And even when they nerfed it, it was still pretty good, because it was very good against control decks and counterspell decks, because essentially you could force through something for very little cost.
Yeah, the cantrip part on that is really funny. It's like, why does this need to draw an extra card? Like, it feels like at that point it's trying to accomplish something, and maybe it's trying to price in, this is a way to beat counterspell decks. I bet that's part of the impetus with the card. Yeah. But of course, the way it ended up being used was not quite.
Yeah, the counterspells just went with it. What did the competitive scene look like when Weatherlight came out, TBS? This is still pretty early in the PT days, right?
Yeah, I think we're talking about PT 5 at the time.
Okay.
So we're talking about second year of the PT. Maybe making more than that. It's probably PT 6 or 7. But regardless, draft is a reasonable piece of the PT now. I think we've had by now like 2 or 3 draft PTs. But still not the biggest thing. Like, Constructed was by far the most important thing.
Were those Rochester drafts at that time?
I think Rochester drafts might have been a bit later.
Okay.
Rochester drafts were like a weird thing where I think they wanted to make the draft be more like a draft, like have more open information. Mm-hmm. I want to say like more like a draft of like, if you're familiar with sports drafts or something like that, like none of the picks are hidden. Like what you can actually pick from.
Right.
And so the whole point of a Rochester draft is to basically kind of like include those politics in the draft format itself, like by essentially laying out the booster and making people kind of like decide which card they want from that booster. We can go into Rochester draft perhaps in a different one, but like it's a very interesting format and very, very skill testing. But one, it took so long. It took over an hour to draft. So it was like really, really onerous on kind of tournament organization. And 2, it was so skill testing that it kind of like didn't have a lot of the fun elements of Magic, where you had like hidden information, bluffing and stuff like that, because all the cards were available. So it just wasn't a very practical format.
Yeah, it certainly didn't stick around. It's one of those really interesting ones where the people that played it, they look back on it fondly, or that something that happened with that format hasn't really been replicated. BDM has talked to me a lot about it. Huey, he was one of the kind of masters of that format back then. But also they've said, it isn't that fun to watch. Like, it takes way, way, way too long. It's way too centered on the draft part, and then the gameplay is sort of an afterthought. And then also there's just awkward things with it, right? With like, there's 3 players, but really you could just have one player kind of call the shots. Whoever the best player was could kind of draft all the seats and figure out all that kind of stuff. And, that takes away a little bit from the team aspect, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of kind of like weird signaling stuff, because like, everyone can see the colors you're taking. So you can kind of like push people to colors a little bit more deliberately. Actually, funnily enough, it actually is a pretty good spectator format.
Oh,
like because all the packs are up. They're all public.
But if it
info,
takes
so.
an hour,
well, that part of it's not good, but like the actual kind of like interest, because
other than that, though, is the
well, like if you think about like draft like coverage now, I mean, it actually is pretty hard to figure out exactly what's happening on the table.
yes.
So because you're usually focused on one drafter, you can only see what they've gotten it. I mean, it's still interesting, but it's not the same kind of open information thing that sometimes it's actually fun to kind of interact with. That being said, I'm not kind of suggesting that they should bring back Rochester as much as I loved it personally. I do think it's not very good for the game, but it was interesting for its time.
Okay. And what about the impact that Weatherlight had when it came out on Constructed at the time? I mean, it is a small set. You know, it can be hard for small sets to produce breakout cards, decks, themes, whatever. Did it do anything? Did it have an impact?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple decks that came out of the set. I mean, like to do with the set's mechanics. There was a Buried Alive deck. Those familiar with Buried Alive, it's like black 2. It's a sorcery. When you play it, you can search your deck for 3 creature cards and put them into the graveyard. What you'd do is you'd Bury It Alive for 3 Nether Shadows. I think, and Ashen Ghouls at the time.
Ashen Ghoul was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure you did both. Like, yeah. So both of those are creatures basically that come out of your graveyard if there's a creature on top of it. And the way that Buried Alive resolves is that you put the 3 creatures down, then the Buried Alive goes on top. So you essentially create 2 creatures that wanted creatures above it, and they would come back and, you know, essentially card advantage. You get 2 creatures or to basically attack the opponent. So there's that's one deck. That was one deck. And at the time, there's a lot of like control decks, like with like Wrath of Gods and things like that. So this kind of mechanic was actually pretty good against it. Also, this set created what was the earliest version of like Stompy, which is like mono green aggro, with Rogue Elephant, the card that we had in the Cracker Pack, the 1 green 3/3 that you get to sacrifice a forest. But it actually used another creature called a Harvest Worm, which is 1 green and 1 for a 3/2. So not bad. But actually, when you played it, you could return a land from your graveyard back to your hand. Mm. So you'd lose the card advantage. You'd obviously still lose the land placement aspect of it, but like it allowed you to kind of like, you know, be able to basically refill and still like cast future Rogue Elephants, etc., etc. But and then there's a couple like individual like cards that were useful. The most kind of notable one is Ophidian. I know. Luis Elias. Yeah. So Ophidian is 1 blue and 2. It's a summon snake. It's a 1/3, and it says 0: draw card. Use this ability basically if Ophidian is unblocked, and don't do any damage. So it basically was the first version of Ophidians. I guess like there are other future ones. Luis, what are the ones that came after it?
Magpie? I mean, there was like Thieving Magpie, Shadow Mage Infiltrator,
Scroll Thief.
Yeah, Scroll Thief is kind of the classic.
Way later, yeah.
Eventually, you get to like Looter Ilkor and what's it called? Like Suspicious Stowaway. But it basically opened the door for like a ton of these like on hit draw card type dudes, and I mean, they played pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a card that, like, I don't know if it's still the case, but, you know, we used to just call those Ophidians, like any type of card in Limited, even if it was just some random common, but if it said if it hit you, you drew a card, oh, it's an Ophidian, you know, it's like, okay, I know what that means. I can, you know, and that was because of this. Also, I don't know about the timing, TBS, but do you remember the World Championship decks, the gold bordered? Mm-hmm. There was one that I had that had Ophidian in it.
Yes.
And it had Man War and Ophidian and a red like flanking knight or something like that. And I remember, you know, it was a tempo deck to basically just bounce and get creatures out of the way and then keep hitting with Ophidian over and over to keep your hand fueled up.
Yeah, I mean, initially people thought this card was really bad. Like, because it was like a 1/3 for 3 mana. It's not particularly like great stats and required to be unblocked. And most people thought, like, you just almost anything blocks it. What people didn't really kind of like take into account was, one, if you were able to connect with it once, it basically kind of refueled itself a little bit. Like, as you say, like, Mana War can actually like bounce things out of the way. You can have counter spells. Force of Will was legal at this time in Standard, or in Type 2 at the time. John Finkel, one of the best players ever, basically made
the best player ever.
I just want to leave it slightly open. I agree, but
TBS is friends with these people, Luis. So
we don't need. So am I. We still need to leave it open.
But TBS is like, he knows these guys. Not.
I don't think John needs like any more accolades. Like, if I call him best player over,
Well, for accuracy, we'll call him the GOAT.
But he basically cut his teeth with this card and this deck. It's essentially mono blue Ophidian, kind of like counter everything, bounce a couple things out of the way. It was very, very like almost draw go, except there was Ophidians in it. So it was a very, very big deck at the time, and really kind of still has impact on how like cards are designed right now. There's still cards that really do something similar because basically Ophidian was the first.
Luis, what are some of the cards that have stood the test of time, maybe that would see play in, say, Legacy or Vintage, or something that they would be legal in even today?
Doomsday is the biggest one, I think. Doomsday is like a tier 1 deck in both Vintage and Legacy.
Doomsday is a heck of a card too. Like, we have never seen a card like this since, right? Like, Doomsday is kind of a one-off.
It's a pretty wild one. I mean, it goes really hard.
It's triple black for a sorcery, and in modern parlance, it says search your library and graveyard for 5 cards and exile the rest. Put the chosen cards on top of your library in any order. You lose half your life, rounded up.
Yeah. So, you end up casting Doomsday, and most of the time, if you can draw 1 card post Doomsday, you can win the game. It's gotten a lot easier because Thassa's Oracle, the blue 1/3, lets you just win the game off Doomsday most of the time. And because your deck's basically empty with a bunch of cyclers. So Doomsday is definitely big. Norrod is another one. That's the 2-mana artifact that not only does it make it so activated abilities can't be played, it also has my favorite flavor text in the game. It's like, it doesn't do anything. No, it does nothing.
Yes. That was such a classic. I mean, that is GOAT tier flavor text for sure.
Yeah, really, really good. And past that, I mean, you have a progenitor here. We have Lotus Veil, which is a land that when it enters the battlefield, you have to sack 2 untapped lands, and you tap it for 3 mana of any color. And there's also Scorched Ruins, which was the same, except it taps for 4 colorless. Now, Lotus Veil wasn't actually good, though. I love that card. It was so cool. It had lotuses on it. Like, it was a really effective callback.
John Avon artwork, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But Lotus Field is the really, really powerful version of that because it is hexproof. So you end up not getting just wastelanded out into oblivion.
Yeah. Gemstone Mine still turns up quite a lot. I mean,
Gemstone Mine's also a good one.
Definitely.
Can you read that one, TBS? For people?
Sure. Gemstone Mine is basically, when it comes into play, you have 3 mining counters on it, and you can tap it for any color, but whenever you tap it for that color, you have to remove one of the mine counters. So it's essentially like a painless City of Brass that you can tap 3 times and then it dies. A lot of combo decks, or a lot of very, very fast decks, use this card basically as one of its mana fixing, because if you're not intended for the game to go past like 3 taps, then it's basically free. So that card turns out a lot. Just to get back to Limited a bit, actually, one of the reasons why White was so good is actually a card that's like still kind of people talk about now. It's called Imperial Armor. This is a white 1 enchant creature, so it's an aura, and the enchanted creature gets +X/+X, where X is the amount of cards in your hand. Basically, you play like a really small, like, you know, a 1/1 flyer, and then you just put Imperial Armor and this, like, never play a card again, and you just hit them for like 5, 6, 7, and the game's just over. And a lot of times, I mean, like, there's a lot of protection creatures in white at the time, so if you put it onto a protection creature, the game would just end. And actually kind of translated over to Constructed, those white weenie decks that also played this card as one of its win conditions. So that card's like really good, and still kind of, you know, you hear people talk about things being kind of like you armor up something or Imperial Armor. I mean, for a long time, it was like the best aura.
Luis, do you wonder what kind of circles TBS rolls in where people are still talking about Imperial Armor?
Dude, I'm sure him and BDM have some group chat that's actively talking about both.
Oh, I'm sure there's a podcast in the works talking about Imperial Armor.
I mean, speaking of a card that BDM would like, Gaia's Blessing or Gaia's Blessing. This card is like very much in a BDM wheelhouse. So Gaia's Blessing is a 1 green and 1 sorcery. Target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from his or her library graveyard into the library, draw a card. And then also has another text. If it gets milled from someone's player's deck, you shuffle that entire deck. So it obviously was a pretty cool recursion card for its time, and it was like people kind of thought of it like a slow regrowth. But actually, what was really, really important is it interacted with very like mill yourself cards. So especially Oath of Druids being the most notable one, where Oath of Druids actually I'll forget the exact words basically, but like it's 1 green and 1 for enchantment. If your opponent has more creatures than you, you basically mill yourself until you get to a creature to put into play. Mm-hmm. Usually, if you wanted a specific creature, you'd just only have that creature. Like you'd have one creature in there, or just a few creatures. But you'd be in danger of decking yourself if you only just played a couple creatures. But Gaia's Blessing kind of interacted with Oath of Druids in a way where you just never deck yourself, and you'd always get the creature you wanted. So it was very, very much kind of like part of that. Also, it was a defense against like millstones and other kind of, you know, decking strategies. So it was just a really like cool card, unusual card with awesome art. It's actually one of my favorite pieces of art. Like it's by Rebecca Gay.
It's beautiful.
Really beautiful piece of art.
I mean, I think I'd be remiss not to mention pre-modern if we're talking about Gaia's Blessing, Oath of Druids. Pre-modern is a kind of thriving unofficial format where people play, well, as the name says, cards that were legal before modern, but also with an extensive like banned and restricted list. So it basically is like old extended or old kind of oldish standard, kind of some amalgam of that. And
I think it's 4th edition and after,
something like that. And Oath of Druids, Gaia's Blessing is like a big player in that. I mean, Gaia's Blessing in general is kind of like a control player's dream of like, how do I put the minimum amount of win conditions in my deck yet not get decked? Or Gaia's Blessing, when you have 2 of them, right, you can just keep looping them. You just keep shuffling your Swords to Plowshares and your counter spells back in until your opponent kind of gives up, because you've removed all their win conditions. And
it really is the ultimate kind of boa constrictor win, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like slowly tightening around you.
So the drawback of win conditions in these control decks is you don't want to put a 6-mana 5/5 flyer in your deck because sometimes you draw that card.
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't help you stabilize. It doesn't help you when you're behind. Whereas Gaia's Blessing, 2 mana replaces itself at the very least. Sometimes you draw it in your opening hand, you fire it off on turn 2 and cycle it, you know. Yeah.
And win conditions are so uncivilized, you know.
This was Magic back as Garfield intended, before all the powerful cards started showing up. But
yeah, and it's worth noting that, you know, they reprinted Gaia's Blessing in Dominaria, you know, which is over 20 years after it first came out.
Yeah, and it didn't see any constructed play.
Nothing. Nobody even touched it.
Control win conditions now are cards like Shieldred, which also stabilize the board and kill your opponent very quickly. Yeah. You know, and gain you life while you're at it, that sort of thing. But Gaia's Blessing is a fun throwback. And I've never played a single game of pre-modern, but I really love looking at the deck lists, and it's always been a lot of fun scoping them out.
I remember
I'd be excited if pre-modern was actually like let's call it wizard supported format. I just generally like to play wizard supported formats, and that's kind of why. But pre-modern kind of does scratch my itch.
Yeah.
I mean, if people are running their own tournaments, which they are a lot of the time, there's all these kind of cool pre-modern tournaments. Then you could end up in a spot where as long as I have competition, I don't need it to be officially sanctioned. That's not the part that really gets me. I just like competing, and I like people caring about the outcomes and stuff like that.
That's pretty cool that if you'd see a bunch of Weatherlight card, one of the cards I remember from back in the day, partially just because the artwork is so striking, but also because it was a card that would pique my brain to try to be like, oh, I can make this a thing. It was Peacekeeper, which was 2 and a white for a 1/1. And it said creatures can't attack. Like it was a moat, like a full on creatures aren't allowed to attack, but you had to pay 1 and a white on your upkeep, or you had to sacrifice it, bury it, is what they say now, what they said back then. Now that's not cumulative upkeep. It's just an upkeep cost. It didn't grow over time. So if you were willing to invest your 2 mana into your very fragile 1/1, you could potentially shut off a creature deck entirely. Like if it didn't have any way to interact with creatures on the other side, or you could protect your Peacekeeper.
Yeah, for a while, this was in the sideboard of some legacy decks because there were some legacy decks that couldn't actually beat this card. So it certainly had some life beyond actually the Weatherlight release itself, but it's just too easy to kill creatures, and 1/1 is just a little too vulnerable.
Look, we talk about play patterns when we look at these old sets and things they wouldn't do these days, and I'm just looking at what happens when Peacekeeper's good. Your opponent can't attack you for 26 turns until you guys blessing them out until you assemble whatever it is, the combo that you're assembling.
Yeah.
And it's just
it's super fun to talk about. It's not very fun to experience, honestly, on either side.
Look, we've made this comparison before, and I think it holds true. These old sets, to some degree, just show you how good of a game Magic is and how cool Magic's core rules are, because when you look at a lot of the cards in these sets, they're not fun cards to play with. They're not fun cards to play against, especially. A lot of them don't do anything. And yet people love to play Magic. I played Magic back then. I remember opening packs of Weatherlight, and I would be reading these cards and be like, whoa, these cards look cool. Yeah. I want to do something with, Tolarian Entrancer. It's 1 and a blue for a 1/1. When it becomes blocked by a creature at the end of combat, you gain control of the creature. And imagine if you cast Lure on Tolarian Entrancer.
That's where my brain just went. Lure it up.
Right. And it's stuff like that is just it's just like catnip, because we were already sold on Magic. Magic was so cool, so fun. And you got to remember too, it was a little different back then. There weren't really other things competing with it in the same way. That's not to say that there weren't other games, because there were a bunch of other TCGs. People tried to jump onto that stuff pretty quickly. Vampire, the Eternal Struggle, Netrunner, Star Wars. But Magic was such a revolutionary thing. And even Weatherlight, a couple years after it came out, it was still true. And you could take the good of the cards that really struck your fancy, and not worry about the cards that didn't. And it was a really cool feeling. And Weatherlight just has that magic for me. When I look at Weatherlight, I still remember these cards, and I'm still this was awesome. I love looking at these cards, and I think that Magic is got a lot more challenges and a higher bar these days. There's more things competing with it. You could be out there playing Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever other game you want to play. And also if they made a set like Weatherlight right now, they would get, kind of rightfully lambasted because we know better now. But even back then, even 11 sets in, you could argue that they kind of knew better, but it was still fine. This set wasn't the best set. It's not going to go down in history as that, but it was a set that had a lot of cool imaginative cards, and at least they tried to have cool cards. One of the reasons Homelands, for example, was found so lacking is that there wasn't really anything that cool going on, even if you kind of handed it to them and said, hey, what if these things did work? Whereas Weatherlight, if some of the things in Weatherlight had worked, they would have just been awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about Magic design now is that they know the boundaries of what the engine and the gameplay can be.
Yeah.
And back then, I think they were still exploring it insofar as like, can we do something like this? I don't mean to say this as too negative, but like Magic sets have become much more formulaic. They have a certain amount of like creatures and spells that interact. Like there's all and they're generally kind of like, to do with what's the mechanic of the set, et cetera, et cetera. So but Weatherlight is kind of full of weirdos. Like it's just like
it is.
A set full, like they have a couple like thematic things going on, but a lot of stuff is like this card is a cool card on its own or an interesting card on its own. Now, what that generally means is it makes the exploration of the set as a constructor player, like building decks, really interesting because you look at a card and say, does this card interact with any of the other like hundreds of other cards I have? Whereas now cards are meant to be played together, and generally the synergies are much, much more apparent. And part of that is good because it helps players kind of like in the right direction and makes sure that decks function. But back then, your deck not functioning doesn't mean you're not having fun as well. You're kind of like building, like the difference. Putting stuff together. I actually think in some ways like I miss that part of like I don't know if my deck's going to work. That phase of your Magic career where you're like just putting stuff together and just hoping that it holds together.
Yeah, for me, that was the entire space I lived in when I had my first little run with Magic, just in high school and just out of high school it was all theoretical. Like I like to build decks, but I had no avenue to actually play them against people. There were tournaments, but I knew I would get destroyed. My friend Jay was playing back then, and at the time he was playing like this mono white, like shadow Armageddon deck. Right. So it like puts out 2 shadow creatures.
Yeah, that sounds effective.
Right. And it's like, it was really good. Right. And I had a bunch of 1-ofs in a snake basket. And, it was just like, so for me, not actually playing in tournaments and before the structures were quite as robust as they are now at game stores and stuff, I didn't actually play that many games of Magic, but I built a ton of decks. I read cards. I tried to come up with ideas, and I would look at things, and it just got my imagination going. The interesting thing about today is that there's so many fewer cards that really get your imagination going. Like they save a couple slots per set for some like rare, mythic rare enchantment or artifact or something that just has a whole bunch of text and you're kind of going, where is this from? It has nothing to do with anything else, but it's a seed for somebody to do that. But now, you're expected to play, right? Like there's just a lot fewer people who just sort of have a bunch of cards in a binder and kind of combine them or think about them. And that's how they interact solely. Now it's like, well, are you building a standard deck? Right? Because if you are, you're going to get absolutely trounced, by these much, much better, more efficient cards. But I never actually had to put my ideas to the test. I was just goldfishing and maybe playing against a friend every once in a while. But I mean, these decks were horrendous. I had combo decks that had 2 copies of the key combo piece. And it's just because I didn't own the other 2 cards, right? It was no, but again, I had no impetus to really push myself to do more, because if I would have taken it to a tournament, I either would have gotten the other 2 copies of the cards and then lost, or I just would have realized this is horrible. This isn't on the same level as what people are doing. And it just wasn't what interested me. When I came back to the game, that's when I was like, okay, I had a more competitive mindset coming from poker and stuff. So I was really trying to engage with that side. And that's what ultimately really hooked me on Magic and took me on the journey I'm on now. But all of these cards, I had the same thing that you guys said, where even just looking through the set when we were getting ready, I remember a ton of these, and there's so many that make you, Peacekeeper and those type of cards that make you want to go, ooh, I want to go through my binder and see if there's a way I can protect this thing and set up this little house of cards where, like, if my Peacekeeper lives, you can never kill me. And I feel really clever about it. Right. And that stuff is, I don't know the outlet for that at this point. Right. I mean, there's a little bit of it in Commander, but even then, I mean, people's Commander decks are no joke, that they're powerful.
I think where you find that is limited, honestly, like weird limited comment.
Yes and no. So yes, you do find it limited. I would not argue with that. But I think there's a lot of people who play that we don't really talk to as much. Do
you think it's a part of the game in a significant way? Because even for the masses of casual people, players who aren't really our audience or our scene, I don't know. I feel like they're playing Commander now.
I mean, but Commander, look, I have seen what Commander looks like at local stores. And yes, to some degree, if your exposure to Commander is like what people play on like the Commander videos you see or the Commander decks you see posted, those aren't quite the same thing as a lot of the Commander decks that people play that are, just a lot less good.
So you're telling me I could make a Peacekeeper Commander deck with Snake Basket?
Well, I'm not saying that necessarily. And look, there's always going to be some amount of yearning for I remember when things were simpler and easier and worse,
Yes.
But overall, I would say that there are a lot of people who are just still playing kind of by feel, as it were.
Okay.
And I think that, yeah, one of the things that struck me about what you said, which I really do agree with, is they know the bounds of Magic and they build cards within those a lot better now.
Yeah.
Weatherlight and all these other old sets, there's a lot of what if they just didn't worry about that and they just made these cards?
Yes.
They did a lot of that. I mean,
yes.
I remember a card, Ether Flash. It's an enchantment for 2 red, and it says, whenever any creature comes into play, Ether Flash deals 2 damage to that creature. And if you look at that card, it's like, what are we trying to do with this card?
Kill it.
Yeah, it's not a card that's very fun in some ways. It makes it so you can't play creatures with toughness 2 or less. But this card captured my imagination. I'd never really built a good deck with it. Heatstroke is an enchantment for 2 and a red. At the end of each combat, destroy all creatures that blocked or were blocked this turn. And it's all these cards are just let's not worry about, how this card's going to be used or if it's a good idea. Let's just make them.
Yeah.
And let your imagination run wild. And for every miss, which there were plenty, there were hits. And at the end of the day, you just need someone to either care about the card and play it or even just think about it.
Yeah.
And I think that was really cool. There's way more cards back then that either literally did nothing or had really bad effects on the game. But, that was part of the charm. And we weren't really worried about that.
Yeah. TBS as a designer, what's your thoughts on that? Because there's a lot of, I think the hit to miss ratio was pretty unfavorable.
Yeah, no, look, I think the other piece of it is that information was just not as available in general for players, right? The internet was barely a thing at the time. I mean, there was message boards and stuff like that, but things just took a much, much longer to actually disseminate. It really wasn't until actually about now in the game's evolution that people started to coalesce on different websites or different mailing lists and things like that, where you started seeing a little bit more kind of groupthink when it comes to deck building. And I think that's partially why it feels different back then, because you'd read your inquests or your duelists to get some of the information. You'd see a couple things on the message boards, but you had such an incomplete idea about what people were doing or what was good to do, and so you had to kind of figure it out yourself. And in most cases, you didn't have you'd play maybe 10 games a week. If you play 10 games a week, that's a lot of Magic to play. That's usually it would take, let's say, 5 hours, and 5 hours is a ton of time to play Magic. I mean, any hobby that took 5 hours back then felt like a long time.
Oh man!
Now,
yes, I have a quick interjection here. Okay. Now we can play Magic on demand. We're gated by the amount of time we have, but if you wanted to, after this show, go and play an hour of Magic, you just could, right? You could fire up Magic Online. You could fire up Arena. Back in the 90s, there wasn't that. I had all the time in the world. I was a kid. Mm-hmm. My desire to play Magic was so high. My ability to play Magic was so low. I spent so much time building decks and sorting cards and playing games against myself where I'd build 2 decks.
Me too.
It was just crazy how different that was.
Yeah. I mean, just the whole infrastructure is different now. And I think that it might be more of what you're missing, kind of Marshall. It's the information kind of desert.
Yeah. Which also is what leads me back to limited on some level, because that gets refreshed more often.
Right. I mean, look, whenever you play something like a Chaos Draft or a set that you've never played before, you have a little bit of that feeling, because I don't know what's good. I don't know what someone else could have. There's a little bit of the unknown that actually really does actually provide some of the kind of interesting and like feelings, and the feelings like of not quite understanding what's going on. And we just know too much now. And like even before the set hits, there's like limited like breakdowns. It's like, I know out of 4 how good a card is.
Right.
And like, how do I get that again on a kind of mass scale? It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
I think the only people that really experience that is like are kids who play in the schoolyard where, they only have like, say, $20 to spend on the Magic deck every month. And so like, they don't look on the internet or something like that. They just have the cards that they open in boosters.
Yeah, and their whole ecosystem is the other kids in the yard, and there isn't this wider machine at work. Yeah. It's interesting. Obviously there's some nostalgia factor here for us three, and there's, you can tell the differences in how they made the cards back then. But this set, and when you look back on it, is it a good set? This came off of Mirage and Visions, which you loved, right?
I'd argue both of those are stronger.
Right.
Yes.
So this one
easily
is not in the pantheon as far as that goes, right?
No, especially coming off those 2 sets, it's a little bit disappointing. To me, it feels like these were definitely different designers than the previous 2. And actually, I don't want to kind of preempt ourselves too much. The next 6 sets are actually together very, very strong like line of sets. This is probably like the weakest set, kind of sandwiched between very, very good sets overall. And so I think in hindsight, I'm not as fond of Weatherlight. It does have some memories for me, but actually the cards themselves are a little bit too weird. Not enough kind of like playable cards. But overall still like, a positive vibe from it.
Yeah.
But overall, I would say this is not their best set. If I had to grade it, it's kind of like a C- set overall, but still not without merit.
Yeah. What about you, Luis? You agree with that from like a cards perspective?
Yeah, I think that it's a set that like is forgettable, is the sort of thing that like I'm not going to give it an F. It's not Homelands. It is a playable set. Like I think that you can play with it and have fun, but it is not a masterpiece by any stretch. It's weaker than the preceding 2 sets. Mm-hmm. And what was the set directly after Weatherlight?
Tempest.
Way weaker than Tempest too.
Sweet.
So
yeah. I can't wait for that one. So, but the interesting thing to me about Weatherlight is, okay, it's a small set. They missed on a bunch of stuff. It has a few memorable cards that have stood the test of time, but not that many. But it's a storyline. Look, I don't know the storyline itself, but it's the fact that they made one. This was the beginning of a storyline that ran from 1997 when this set came out through to 2001 that they wove parts of this into future sets. And then they even, there's echoes of it all the way up to this year.
Yeah, I would say the storyline ended this year. Like it like the first set was like, I think it's 4 blocks that basically contributed to. It started with Weatherlight, ended with Apocalypse, basically end of that storyline, and there was like there's basically 4 blocks after Weatherlight.
So that was the 97 to 2001.
That was 2001. But I mean, they've come back to Dominaria. They've come back to the Phyrexian storyline, and an Invasion storyline as well. So they've almost kind of like redone the storyline just for modern sensibilities. And I would say they've probably done the last Phyrexian set for a while. I'm sure they'll do another Phyrexian set in the future, but in my eyes, I think most of the stuff that they started off here, they've ended. As in, the Weatherlight started off here, the Weatherlight became completed in I think it was all will be one.
Okay.
So there's a lot of threads that have been tied up, and honestly, Magic's core identity from a story point or from a narrative perspective starts here, and it talks about a lot of characters that we actually see and get to know in sets like Jared, Karn, Sisay. All these characters like had their beginnings right here.
Yeah, and this 4-block run, this 4-year run that they did with it, I mean, that was pretty revolutionary, right? I think that they were really starting to toy with the idea of telling a broader narrative from Magic IP, what we call it now. versus, the earlier ones, it was clear with like Arabian Nights type sets where they wanted to be able to tell a story or serve a setting within one set or maybe a block. But now they were like, well, there's something bigger at play here. We can actually use this to tell a story that spans more than just one set or one block. And they stuck with that after. I mean, we've seen revisiting not just our friends on the Weatherlight and the Phyrexians and stuff, but all different types of things. We in fact routinely now go back to old planes and revive storylines over and over again on Innistrad. And, we've seen all the Mirrodin stuff around this, and right, this stuff just keeps happening over and over again where, this is what Magic is now. Oh, it's the new Chandra, right? Well, how many of those have they made? 9, 10, right? Like, we've been on a ride with Chandra for years and years and years and years now. And take that and multiply it out over planeswalkers and planes and characters on those planes, Sorin Markov and all these, this family, they build these things out from being like a one-off planeswalker with kind of like, well, what's this character all about, to 10 years forward. We've been to their plane 3 separate times. And now we know about their family and the feud with the other one, and then the invasion and the war, and then one of them got stuck in a whatever, and and there's all these things. But this is where they started to toy with that idea of storytelling on a broader scale. And even though for people like Luis, you and I, TBS, that isn't the core of what we love about Magic, it is for a lot of people, and it certainly is a thread that ties things together at the least.
No, I mean, like, also one thing they actually launched at this time was the novels. Before that, they had a couple of like Magic novels. They were kind of one-offs. Mm-hmm. They actually started kind of like a novel series. Because I believe very similar time, they were considering acquiring Dungeons and Dragons from, like, Wizards acquired Dungeons and Dragons from TSR, which is the owners at the time. And so they wanted to kind of like create a multimedia experience with the Magic IP. And while they haven't really been able to kind of like, expand too much into games or movies or TV shows, and they've wanted to, like, they definitely were able to kind of like break into kind of a meta narrative that actually created a whole new type of player. People who we call Vorthoses before, like, you had the kind of Team Johnny Spikes who are about playing the game, and Vorthos is someone who cares about the lore of the game, and that really doesn't exist until like the Weatherlight and that storyline.
What about you, Luis? Anything stand out about the storyline stuff? The fact that they started to really expand their vision for what they could do, what kind of stories they could tell with the Magic set around Weatherlight?
Yeah, I'm not the like biggest storyline follower, just in general, but it did feel momentous, and I still think it was, that they're like, hey, let's talk about Magic storyline. Let's make our own stories. Because we had Arabian Nights, which they pulled stories from our existing world into it, which I don't think they're going to do too much of like that literal thing again. And then you had a lot of sets that didn't have like the strongest of stories. Like, I guess like Antiquities, I had a story, so maybe that was like the first time, but like it wasn't like, this is the first time around this time they felt like they were really, really telling a story, a saga, the Weatherlight saga. Like, this was going to be a thing, and this was that's the title of this set, right? And it is just interesting that players back then, even like the casual ones like myself, did see this and think like, oh yeah, Magic it's becoming big enough to make its own stories in a serious way. Like, we're really planting the flag here. And I thought that was cool, and I still do.
As we move towards wrapping up on the Weatherlight, TBS, what are the things that stood out to you? Like, what's the legacy? What's the lasting impact of this set? What is it that you think about when you think of Weatherlight? Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, I think it really is story. I mean, as I say, none of the cards or mechanics are like, there's no mechanics that define the set. But I do still think it's a vibe, for want of a better word.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it kind of like tied together like some narrative elements, some like interesting ideas This was actually one of the last times they really, really did kind of negative costing on a kind of large scale. There are other mechanics like you'll see in the future, like Echo, that are negative, but they're not as negative and punitive as they are in this set. So I think they learned a lot. But this is the last, what I call grab bag set. I mean, I call it the Dark Legends. These are all kind of like, we're just going to make a bunch of cards and like hope they stick. That's what I feel like Weatherlight is. Since like from Tempest onwards, nearly every set or every block has a mechanical and like narrative identity that's actually very tight for in most cases. This set is very, very loose, very, very old school design, and I think it did better than the Dark or Homelands or Fallen Empires. Like those sets are like much, much worse than this one, but it's probably the worst of kind of like this batch of sets. And so what I would say is I don't think it actually has that much lasting legacy in kind of Magic history, except the storyline piece of it.
What about you, Luis?
Yeah, that's the strongest one. I mean, look, every Magic set we can name a couple cards that had an impact and still do, like Doomsday, for example. Mm-hmm. But Weatherlight's just not high on that list. And you ask the average player, even someone who's like fairly invested, has been playing for a while, can you name 5-10 cards from Weatherlight, or what are your iconic cards from Weatherlight? Like, how many could you have named, Marshall? Literally zero.
No, I had some of these cards, so I probably could have picked off 3 or something, you know.
But like, what was your guess for the most iconic cards, for example?
For me?
Yeah.
The card that came to my mind was Mind Stone.
Yeah, I mean,
which is a card,
cool.
But it's hard to call that card iconic. When you guys mentioned Abeyance, I did remember that one. Then I started sifting through. And the card that sticks with me the most is Ophidian of all of them. But I mean, if you would have just said, hey, Weatherlight, you know that set? Oh, yeah, I know that set. Okay, how many cards can you name? And I probably would have got 2 or 3. And then I would have probably just remembered Mind Stone and not remember that Ophidian was from it. So none of these are really, singing praises that Weatherlight was super resonant.
I will say, at the time, I built a lot of decks out of this set. Me
too.
Because the cards were so interesting and so weird, there was actually quite a lot of deck building kind of say, oh, is this any good? And so, I mean, when I just having a look at the visual spoiler, it's like, oh, you know what? I probably played about like half of these cards in a constructed deck. And I don't mean like in tournaments necessarily. Like I just built it to see if it worked. And I think that is actually like to its credit. This is a set that does make you think about like, oh, how can I build decks in an interesting way?
I mean, that's true that is a success of the set in the moment. When you're talking about its legacy, Weatherlight's pretty forgettable. Besides the name is like really the only thing.
Yeah, the name and the story, the characters that it spawned ultimately, definitely were there. You know, the other thing is the set symbol. It's
the good set.
It's one of the better set symbols.
It is one of the better ones. That's true.
It just, you know exactly what that is. It stands out. It looks really good.
I mean, do you know what it is?
It has a tome word.
Yeah, it's in the set. It's Thran Tome. Mm-hmm. It's a 4-mana artifact. Like this is a time where like books dispense like card advantage, and so this actually was a pretty exciting card. It's like 4-mana artifact, 5-mana tap. Reveal top 3 cards to your opponent. They gave you they got to choose one of them to put into the graveyard, and you get the other 2.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like an early like fact or fiction,
right? Where it makes somebody make a choice about something, and for your 9 mana, you can get 2 cards in your hand.
Yeah, there are worse deals.
Do it again over and over. All right. Well, that was really fun because we're really starting to hit the point where all 3 of us, you know, I mean, what's the next one coming up, TBS?
Tempest.
I mean,
that's going to be a good one.
Dude, like Tempest is my mode.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I was there.
And you know what? We're not there yet, and we're not going to be there with Tempest, but we're going to get to the point where I'm the one who knew exactly what was going on in competitive play, and TBS didn't. Because right now, TBS has always been more informed because he was a pro and a competitor and invested player. Look, you won a Grand Prix. You played in the Pro Tours.
You were traveling. You were a pro.
You were a pro. Look, I was not. I was the dude at home reading the sideboard and thinking about this stuff. Had never played in a PTQ. Obviously, at some point that kind of switches, but we haven't gotten there yet. And it's been fun to see it through your eyes. But I'm also looking forward to onslaughts when I jump into that. So once we get over there, we'll get to that.
All right. Well, we're getting close. TBS, thanks so much for hanging out with us as always. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know time zone wise, you had to do a little bit of juggling, but we appreciate it.
That's right. The kids are asleep. So, as long as they stay asleep, I'm okay here.
Where can people find you, TBS, if they want to catch up?
Well, I'm on X or Twitter. at TBS dash. Basically that's the only kind of like Magic content. I occasionally ask things about Magic on there. Feel free to ask me something on there. I'm happy to interact with people over there.
Thanks for coming on again, TBS. If you want to find Luis or I on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including all of our old episodes, some of which we'll probably bump into at some point when we do these shows with TBS. But we've got a number of years of sets to cover before we get to that point. And once again, we want to thank the Ben Sec for coming on the show and going through memory lane with us. We're going to call it a show here, but we'll be back next week. We'll see you then. Luis, you got anything? No, he's leaving. He had a meeting lined up, so we kind of hit his hard stop there. What should we do for a sign-off, TBS? You got any stories, anything?
Well, I mean, I kind of hinted at it a bit earlier, but Weatherlight actually marked the origin story of the TBS nickname, I guess.
Oh, yeah, right. So where did this come from?
So I may have said this on a previous LR, but I'll say it again because it's a cool story. So this is when Australian Nationals was in 1997. So I was a player who played a lot and also had in the Australian community, let's say an outsized voice. I used to kind of really, really go on the mailing lists on all the message boards. And I would say that my voice kind of was outsized my actual skill level. I don't think I was a particularly good player. I was kind of, I like to say, I was
pretty dang good.
No, back then I was kind of the worst of the good players.
Gotcha.
And so I had some friends who were very good, all of them better than me. But I was able to kind of, I was play tested with them, and it was kind of a joke that I was amongst them that I wasn't particularly great. So anyway, we're at Australian Nationals, and we play first round, and I'm playing this guy from West Australia. So someone who knows Australia is very large country. West Australia is kind of like the westernmost point. It's very isolated. It's not very close to any place. So I'm playing this guy who's essentially, let's call him, not very well versed in kind of tournament Magic, except he's part of the mailing list and has heard my name and thought that if he talks so much, he must be reasonable. So I destroyed this guy, just beat him really quickly. And so one of my friends who I playtested with overheard my opponent talk to one of his friends, and he was like, I lost this round, but I lost to the Ben Sec. And my friend, who thought this was the most hilarious thing, because he basically started getting all my friends. I was like, oh my God, that's the Ben Sec. And so the whole weekend they're kind of mocking me with this nickname, the Ben Sec. And eventually, the entire tournament that knew me basically started calling me that. And eventually, this was not meant to be a nickname of endearment. This is a nickname of mockery. But
all good nicknames.
Yeah, and at some point I was like, what are you gonna be? If you don't want to be the butt of the joke, you should kind of own it. And so I started kind of signing off my emails to the mailing list as the Ben Sec, and eventually just kind of shortened to TBS, and the rest is history.
That is awesome. I had not heard that story. I don't think you said that on here. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've there was a time where people basically didn't know my name; they only knew TBS, and I think that was a pretty cool thing to have in kind of magic history, I guess.
Yeah.